Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Ayers. I'm going to be talking today about monitoring and troubleshooting with application insights. So I am the practice lead for Intelligent Cloud in the Southeast for the Cognizant Microsoft Business Group. And, my area is responsible for Azure infrastructure, DevOps, and app modernization. I've been developing and speaking for many years, and one of the things that I've leveraged and one of the tools I've used quite a bit in my work has been application insights. You need to monitor and observe your application and how it works. So I've got some code samples out on GitHub, and there's my blog and LinkedIn if you're interested in following me. So I really want to cover Azure Application Insights as a whole, like what it offers, the capabilities of it. I'm going to dive into the SDK itself to show you some of the functionality that's provided through the SDK for various languages. We're going to talk a little bit about some advanced topics around telemetry processors and initializers. We're going to see it running, and we're going to see it live with Visual Studio and in the portal. And then if there's any questions that you might want to hit me up with on Twitter, we can handle that. So, Application Insights. Application Insights is a type of APM, an application performance management tool, or some people call it an application performance monitoring tool. And what this means is it takes sources of data from various places, like traces, so individual data points, metrics, maybe CPU, memory, session, end user experience. So, what's the page load time? What's the response time or error rate? All of those feed into this engine, and together it generates a more holistic picture. You can now correlate, what's going on with the system with what the experience is for an end user. So you get a whole view of the life cycle. Now, Application Insights works by a couple of different ways. You can leverage some of the codeless functionality through Azure, which just kind of runs an agent on the Azure infrastructure and can feed that data back into App Insights. You can install a SDK in your code, which is available through like package repositories like npm and NuGet for a number of languages, or you can include some JavaScript libraries. And so that lets you have some telemetry from a user, client browser from some of your middle tier systems. It can even capture query and performance data from the databases and other Azure services that you're implementing and on-prem. So what this allows you to do is get all of this data into App Insights, and then that can drive alerting, that can drive reporting through Power BI. It can feed the integrations that are available in Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. You can query it through your own REST APIs, or you can even export it out. It's very powerful and low impact. So they do provide languages support with SDK and libraries around .NET, so you can get C# and VB libraries for it. There are Java libraries available. Like I said, there's JavaScript packages, which include things for React and Angular. There are Node.js libraries, and there are some Python libraries. And it supports integration, direct integration with some of the logging frameworks that are available. So like iLogger, Log4Net, Log4j, and of course the platform systems like Azure Monitor. Now, this is where it kind of gets cool and where I think some people get thrown off a little bit sometimes. They're like, oh, it's only for .NET, it's only on Azure. Well, there are some codeless options and deep integrations on the Azure platform for things like their VMs and app services and functions. But you can also install agents into on-prem VMs. You can also run it through the SDK with console apps. You can do it with desktop apps. If you use App Center and Xamarin, you can tie into mobile apps. And so there's ways to instrument and get telemetry on things running in the cloud, running on-prem, or running on your phone. It also has export, like I said, integrations with Power BI and Stream Analytics. So you can kind of consume and analyze some of the outputs in any way you want. Well, what does it gather? Like I mentioned what APMs gather at the beginning, but what does App Insights specifically gather? Well, it it gathers kind of out of the box with very minimal customization needed, request rates, response times. If you're calling a dependency, what is the success and failure rate and the response time of that dependency? Are you generating exceptions in your backend code? Are you generating exceptions in the browser? Like, are you able to tell that you're having some JavaScript errors? What is the page view and performance of that? So if you're pulling in lots of asynchronous calls in your web pages, if you're pulling in lots of CSS and it's taking time to render the page, how long does that look like? Um, how many users are on your system right now? Like, can you get user and session counts for the holistic system? Can you look at specific counters? So if you have maybe queues or multiple requests going, can you see that? If you're running, I don't know, containers, can you get actual host diagnostic around maybe the host CPU or memory, or how the IO is impacting the host of your application? Can you get those diagnostic trace logs where you're logging out messages, and can you gather those? Or how about custom events? So as you have an application, maybe someone's landed at the site and you're trying to encourage them to sign up for an account or log in. You can track that through custom metrics, and then that can feed into some of the user flows and analysis that is provided by the system. So as we look at things in the portal, what are some features that App Insights itself provides based on all that data? Well, the first thing it does is it can generate smart detections. So as your application runs, it starts generating a baseline for what is happening with your system, how much memory it consumes, normal response times, normal call rates. When you start deviating from those baselines, you can trigger alerts. And this is the normal Azure Monitor alerting system, which can send a message on Teams or Slack. It can do PagerDuty and call a cell phone, send an email. It can scale things up. So you can trigger automation runbooks in Azure to interact with the platform and try to self-heal. It gives you a lot of options, but it can also detect things like, I don't know, memory leaks, memory usage, and you can start seeing abnormal behaviors. It's very, very cool. And they're in the middle of revamping it to fully integrate better into some of the alerting systems. It also can dynamically generate an application map. So if you have a distributed application with multiple different components, a database, a backend, maybe multiple backends, maybe a function and a front-end web page, because App Insights uses operation IDs, it can start doing coordination and correlation. And so it can start to tell, oh, this request came in from the front end, with an ID of 1, and it made multiple calls to dependent systems. All of those are still correlated back to that original ID. And so it can generate this map to start seeing how things talk and operate. And the way it's written and the way it's designed is you get to see each kind of instance and endpoint as a node on the map that lets you see its normal kind of response times, behavior, call times. It really gives you a snapshot into how a holistic application is behaving. This is a great thing to have up on a monitor in a team room when everybody's together, or have as an internal dashboard. There's also profiler capabilities. So as you are running applications in the cloud or on-prem, and you start running into maybe performance issues or areas where you're concerned about long delays, you can run a profile. The profiler can automatically run a couple times every hour to try to determine what does the execution through these hot paths look like. These dumps and these profiles can then be loaded into Visual Studio and kind of actually step through the code to see what's happening and kind of analyze it. This is extremely powerful. It's really, really cool. Kind of switching gears, there's also some, like I said, UI and browser interaction. And so this is where, as you're looking at your users and your sessions, you can start trying to do a little bit more insights into how they interact with your application. Maybe you're implementing new features and you want to see if people are using the feature. I worked with a company where we had an online editor that very much was like a spreadsheet. It was a tabular grid, and they had a quick edit feature where you could quickly set some of the fields with a drop down. And we weren't seeing a lot of use of that functionality. We were trying to figure out why we were getting some feedback from users about it. And so when we implemented App Insights, at the bottom right, you see the user flows, and this tracks the page views, the requests to kind of show, how the users go through and interact with the system. But what we found was they were going to the grid and then they were loading a full editor on each row, making one change and then saving and going back to the grid, going to the next row, opening it up, making a change, because the fields they were trying to quickly edit weren't available in that display. And so by just making small changes to functionality, we improve the user flow and the user experience, and greatly increased that engagement. As we get telemetry, one of the things we definitely want to do is search through it, and we want to find, is it coming from a region? Maybe a certain region had an outage. Maybe we're looking for certain events that we've specifically called out or triggered, certain pages that we're exploring. Maybe we want to look at performance. Let me find the dependent calls that take more than 100 milliseconds. We're going to be able to do that very easily, and then actually switch over into Log Analytics, which has its own query language, KQL, Kusta query language, for really diving into specific type of queries that we can share and work on. I mentioned metrics before. Well, with the Metrics Explorer, you can actually pull in data from disparate systems and disparate resources. So maybe I'm looking at the metrics in the database, and I'm also going to look at metrics on a web server to see how some of my performance issues correlate. Maybe there's an unexpected relationship I didn't see, but by digging into some of the metrics, I can kind of surface that and really explore what's happening and where some of my contention issues might arise. And we can put all these together into dashboards. Again, this is great for putting up on a board or on a monitor in a room. There's also a live metric stream, and this is really cool. On the right-hand side is sample telemetry. You can apply different filters you want to it. If you have multiple apps all pointing at the same App Insights instance, you can see at the very bottom of that window, and I'll show this live on the portal, it shows each instance or server that is sending in data. And so with just the click of a button, you can home in on one specific instance or one specific node and see what's going on. And if you're bringing together multiple data sources and maybe you're doing a load test or performance test, you can start trying to look at all the different data points to see what might be causing some of those issues. And finally, pricing. So you do get, it does base on Azure Monitor and Log Analytics, and those ingestion rates, I think you get like 5 gigs free, and then it goes to about $2 a gig after that. They also have a web availability test that you can sign up for, but then there's multi-step ones those are extra. That would be like, I want to log in and I want to add this to my cart and I want to place this order. That might be a multi-step test. This is subject to change, of course, but I would check out the pricing out on the calculator. But it's phenomenal for what you get for it. So let's dive into the SDK specifically. And I'm trying to fly through this content so we can get to the live stuff. So bear with me. So codeless. I mentioned that App Insights and Azure Monitor is kind of baked into many of the Azure resources that are out there. So for some of the resources on Azure that this is kind of turned on or enabled by default or can be enabled, we're talking about things like app services, functions, some of the Kubernetes functionality, and some specific Windows VMs. In an on-prem world, you can install a agent or a module onto a Windows VM to get some of that monitoring sent back into Azure at App Insights. And typically all it needs to do is to be able to reach out to a certain set of domain or IPs on 443 to send the telemetry back. When you're running app services or functions, there is more limited support on what can automatically get instrumented. So it can automatically do quite a bit with .NET and .NET Core. With Java, it might not automatically work on everything, but there are some cases where Java can automatically be instrumented with this codeless thing. And this means you don't have to make any changes at all to your application, your code, or anything around your app. And Node can have some support. When we want to go a step further and actually make some code changes and integrate the SDK to gather more data, this is where we're going to do this code-based monitoring. And once we've installed it in one of the supported languages, I mentioned before, a lot of .NET, Java, Node, JavaScript, Python. You get this type of capability where you can specifically call, I'm tracking a page for you. So if you're running a single page app that really doesn't make a lot of requests and it loads the application and then you're just routing between different views, you can explicitly call track page view when you want to, note that someone's visited a page. Maybe you have a custom event that you really want to track, maybe part of your marketing funnel or just your engagement. We've implemented this new feature. Did somebody turn it on? That might be an event. Is someone, doing an action? They've added something to their cart, or they've placed an order, or they've signed up. Those are great events. Maybe we have a metric that we're trying to calculate. We're doing some back-end processing, and maybe we're, tracking something around our queues or our messages. We can track that very easily. By default, there is some great exception handling that happens, but you might want to explicitly track some exceptions that you handle with additional details. So you can do that, and it will tie into the other telemetry that goes. Additionally, you might want to track some requests if you're making requests to a server or something specific, or maybe you want to do some logging. You can do tracing messages, or you can explicitly track some dependencies. And these are all some really great features of the SDK that I'll touch on. But this allows you the capability, if you want to log all the things. And logging all the things gives you that data to start analyzing what's going on with your system, giving you that monitorability and that observability that you're looking for. Now, we looked at pricing a little bit earlier about data ingestion. We looked at all these options for logging. If we were to log everything, it could be dramatically expensive at some point in time. So one of the features that App Insights has, and it has 3 different modes of sampling. And I want to explain these because I'll show you how to tweak them. So out of the box with .NET, an ASP and ASP Core application, you get adaptive sampling. And what this means is, for a given request, it might send 4 or 5 bits of telemetry, started request, time, duration, all sorts of information. If you capture 100% of the samples, that means for 100 requests, you have 100 bits of telemetry. You capture every single thing. Most of the time, we're really looking for trends. So you might not need to capture every single bit of data. We might want to capture a lot when we first do a deployment, but over time, as things are running, we could probably get away with capturing maybe 50%, maybe 25%. Or if the application is running and it knows it's sending 2 or 3 bits of telemetry that are all exactly the same, maybe it doesn't need to send all of them. That we know what's going on with the performance, the behavior, the success rates. That's not really affecting things. So it can adaptively start sending less to help reduce your costs for storage. Now, maybe you want to change that. So you can do fixed rate sampling. And this is actually like a setting that you're going to do either in your code or in your configuration where you say, I want to capture 5%. I'm explicitly only caring about 5%. And so it's going to, out of 20 requests, it's going to throw away 19 of them and it will send 1. Now, if you have a front end and a back end part of your application, they're both using App Insights, because of that correlation ID, they will work together to make sure that if you capture some front end telemetry, you also capture back end telemetry for that same request. So you can do end to end analysis and you don't get, mixed and mashed up telemetry between 2 different disparate systems that you really can't put together. And finally, the third option is ingestion sampling. This happens at App Insights itself at the service level, and there's a little slider that you can adjust. Um, if you haven't defined explicitly in your SDK or in your code that you want adaptive or fixed rate sampling, ingestion happens, in Azure. And there's a slider, and you can easily slide it from 100 down to like 5% or up to 20 or 50. That that will just still generate the data on the application. It'll still send it to Azure on the application, but Azure just won't save and record that data. So if you're really concerned about bandwidth, kind of going with the adaptive or fixed rate sampling might be better if you're worried about bandwidth out from the application or the client. If you're just worried about costs around data storage, the ingestion sampling is also another good way to handle that. That brings me to telemetry processors and initializers. These are bits of code, almost like middleware, that you can add into the App Insights pipeline to decorate, enhance, or add information to each telemetry request. So an example of an initializer might be that maybe the system knows about the user and we don't want to log what the user is, but maybe we want to log the class of user to say, oh, this is an admin, this is an unsigned in user, this is a signed in user, so that you can kind of add some additional properties that might not be easily found through the normal telemetry. Maybe you want to use a processor to filter and throw out some telemetry that just adds noise to the reporting, and maybe that you're going to get 404s on some image types. You could write a telemetry processor to ignore 403s or 404s when its image is going to a certain path. That way it doesn't pollute your data and you have a little bit easier analysis. Let's go into actually playing with App Insights, and let me show you guys a couple of things with the time. So I have a resource group out in Azure, and if you can tell, I have 3 different applications and 3 different App Insights. Let me go ahead and open the basic one. So this is my site, just a very simple application. I'm running on like a standard or free plan. So, yep, just an application. It's got kind of 2 views, very basic. You can see I've configured it for App Insights. Now this option that I've done is using a codeless monitoring. So when I defined the resource, what I did was I came in here and said enable. And you can see down here, I've just got some basic telemetry that's being gathered. And I've got on .NET Core, this is disabled. So, I've interacted with the page. I can now go to the App Insights instance and you can see I'm not, see if it loads. I'm not getting any live metrics because I'm just doing some basic stuff. I did have it fully enabled before. So as I say, you might have seen an application map, not really, but this is what you get when you just do a very basic one and you just kind of have it at the minimal. You don't get a lot of requests. Like just turning it on doesn't give you a lot. Now, if I say I want to turn it on to the recommended and enable some of these things, including SQL, what's going to do is it's going to make a change to the app settings. So it's going to recycle the application. So if I come in here, and it might take it a second to refresh. Again, I didn't make any code changes. This is that codeless option where I've really just enabled a setting on an app service while it's running. So once this refreshes, if I go back to my App Insights and my live metrics, what we should see when the app fully reboots is that App Insights will connect, and here we go. It's just connected. This is our live metrics. We can see that the site's now running live, and oh, there we go. I hit a trace, I'm in prod. I can start seeing health, CPU, and exception rates and requests on this instance. If I come back here and I F5. Now that it's warmed up, I can go back and forth between pages. And if I come here, you can see I had a few more requests and their durations. So that's just using the codeless option. We can do a lot better than the codeless option. Let's look at the, and here is the application. Just very basic app. I've got some infrastructure as code to build out the site. Let's go up a level. Well, and before I do, so I did add the serverless based. You can see I had some views. It detected the application. I can go into my transactions and I can look at the last 30 minutes. And now hopefully I can see some page views. It started adding some information to my requests. I don't have any availability tests configured. This is where I can just kind of have a URL ping test and give my site a name and say, go make sure it's available. And it will actually go and check multiple locations around the world to make sure it's up. I can look at failures. Don't really see it on the server side. And look at performance. So this is some of our basic stuff. So let's go back and now let's look what happens if we go a little bit more advanced. So let's have an application that we've I'm sorry, I meant to click on. Have an application that we added App Insights to specifically, and I will show you what that looks like. This is I've added NuGet packages into my application in the code, and so when I've released it up, I've put in the instrumentation key that is needed for the site. So here's my my other site, looks about the same, but I've added a couple things to it. So I've got my normal live metrics I can connect to, and you can see, yep, it's connecting to the app. Running on a different machine, and I've got, clicking around a little bit. I've got a few more requests coming in. Just like before, I could filter down my my requests. You can see it's getting these requests at multiple times. That's because on this one, I configured intentionally an availability test. And so this is testing access to my code from around the world, every 5 minutes. And I can see the count of successful. I can look at my performance data, and I can even kind of drill down into what's going on with the ones that are taking multiple seconds, what instances are doing that, what were some of the dependencies that were causing it. I can look at specific requests or access that's happening that might be causing issues. I can dive into, if I've had any failures, I had a weird thing there. So this is some of the functionality you can get just very quickly with that. This is how we might monitor our apps and how we can see what's going on with them, and we can start troubleshooting those specific issues, those specific failures. This is looking at a browser, looking at exceptions. This is even saying I have some bad JavaScript. I'm using an Edge browser, so it's telling me, hey, it was in Edge. And I can look here and kind of dig into some of my end-to-end requests and see, there's a reference in my site.js. So I don't know if you noticed before, I had specifically added a failure into my JavaScript because when I was doing development and many bigger systems, it was hard to always track down if you had a JavaScript error potentially in some of your applications. So, being able to actually capture browser exceptions, browser failures at a telemetry level, and being able to show what happened before and after this, be able to start tracking down, how people interacted with my site. that is really powerful. Well, again, this is just basic stuff. Let me show you what happens when you add telemetry or add the SDK to an application. So one of the things that I did was I installed this App Insights, Microsoft Application Insights NuGet package into my application. And you can do that a couple ways. There's this like connected services that are now available, and you can say, hey, I want to connect it to App Insights, and it'll actually like look at your Azure subscriptions and see if you have an App Insights, and it'll connect to it. And it adds like 1 or 2 lines of code. It usually adds something like an add application insights telemetry. I've done some customization, so I'll talk to you about that in a moment. But it just adds a services add application insights, and that's really it. Like that's all that's really needed. The add application insights and a connection string or an instrumentation key so that it knows to phone home. You know, as you build and release code through your pipelines, that is very easy to transform and put the right values so that you have an app insights for dev. You have a different one for, you know, your QA, your staging, and maybe a different one for production. And if you have multiple pieces, multiple applications or microservices that all go to the same app, I highly recommend using one app insights so that you can get that distributed information all unified together. So I mentioned before, telemetry initializers. This is kind of how you add them in App Insights at this point. You know, you plug it into the pipeline, and a telemetry initializer, what it does is when it gets a piece of telemetry, it adds or enhances it. You know, so in this case, it's actually taking apart the telemetry that's being processed. And if it's bad, it quits out. But you know, if you get some sort of 400 or 500, it actually adds this new property to the request telemetry. So if I was having this error, I would see this new property out in the portal, and I could filter on it. I could query on it. So this is one way to do telemetry initializers. Another way maybe is I want to do some lookup stuff. I want to look up, you know, their claim and see if they're logged in and what claims they have. You know, so these are 2 initializers. They both inherit from iTelemetry initializer. I use initializers sometimes. Like it's been rare. I don't use them a ton. Most of the time, I get a lot of what I need out of the box. But I'll use these to maybe help clean up data so that when I'm trying to drill down or I'm exploring something, I can have those extra little bits I need. So we have 2 initializers. There's 2 ways to add them. One way is you can add a singleton as an iTelemetry initializer in App Insights when it starts up. We'll automatically pull those in. The other way is you can get the telemetry configuration in your configure application, and you know you can add it in here. You can see that this is another way you can do it. And then I did touch earlier on sampling. So by default, the adaptive sampling is on in .NET applications. You can override a lot of the options, and there's quite a few choices of things that you can adjust, you can tweak. And this is how you might turn off adaptive sampling. This is 1 or 2 examples of how you can now call adaptive sampling. Maybe you want to exclude dependencies. You really only want your adaptive sampling. Maybe maybe you don't want to use either adaptive samplings. Maybe you want to do fixed rate, so you always get that 5%. You can do either of those. The other 2 things I want to show are, you know, here I have a filter I'm plugging in, and up here I'm plugging in processors. These are all the same. These are telemetry processors that allow you to get a piece of telemetry, and if you want it to go, you can send it. If not, maybe you just stop processing on it. So you could filter it and not send out processing. Or maybe you want to check if it's from a certain source. Or maybe you want to see if there's, you know, it's a 401. So you can easily do these type of things. Now, I mentioned App Insights was not just for web applications. So I do want to show, this is LinkPad. This is just a simple way you can run sample code. And I've got, a background task that's going to be doing some processing. I've got some, dependencies here. So I was running that. I'm going to stop it. And you can see the telemetry is stopped. There's no more requests coming in. If I start this up and I'm starting to execute this application, so it's going to come in, it's going to register the telemetry client, and it's going to start tracking telemetry. It's now sending requests again. So I have a console app that's now sending out requests to the cloud. We can make a change. We can tweak this very easily. Maybe I want to track an event. This SDK is very flexible. So now I've just made a change. I've stopped the app. I've restarted the app. So you can now see I'm starting to get events flowing into the telemetry system. And I do have two things running here. I have these track events and dependencies, and then I have some traces and some events running in a background task. So it does support multi-threading. I can go into my transaction search, and I could say, last hour, I only want to look at traces. Let's see what we got. Or custom events. That's odd. And there goes the demo gods. Yay. But yeah, here we can see our other requests and our other events. So that concludes my discussion here. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Application Insight is very... Tell me.
I was just say, feel free to reach out. Follow me on Twitter. Find me on GitHub.
Yeah.
I've got sample code for both of these.
Okay, yes. Okay. I will write Twitter. And okay, I think we have no specific questions. No specific question, also because I think if you want a question about that, it could be very long. Application Insight is very powerful, and out of the box, it's easy to implement. And as you show us, is a lot of information for free, more or less. So,
and
but it's very powerful. Very powerful.
It works on a background thread, so it won't really impact the performance of your system at all. So it'll do it asynchronously on a background thread, and you can even configure it to use some disk space to store telemetry if it goes offline for a bit. So when it comes back online, it can send up the telemetry that it gathered. Like, there's some amazing functionality built in.
Yeah, it's true. It's very... Oh, there is a question. Wait. Okay, there is a question. Did you see it, or do you want to?
I'm looking. So you suggest web client JavaScript insights only in testing. I also use it in production. I have not seen any performance issues with App Insights or profilers. So two parts to the question. First part, I think, the web client JavaScript stuff. There are libraries that take the pure JavaScript, which is really just a snippet of JavaScript code, and I meant to share that, and I did not, so I can do that super quick. But it's literally just kind of a, this is how they do it in ASP. It's just a JavaScript snippet that you pretty much add. But when you're looking at it in a browser, what you get is next to nothing. It's these couple of get this script here, like kind of get this script, and there's a little bit of styling on it. It's very lightweight and it doesn't impact performance that I've seen. And I run it in every environment. For the profiling is specifically for some of the .NET code. They do it at wide space times so that it's not going to impact things regularly, and you can turn it on and off as needed. So if you don't feel that you need to do profiling, you can kind of turn that off. And you can, here under App Insights, you can go down and disable the profiler or the snapshots even. So if you have those are very easy to turn off to limit the impact that you might face for performance. Any other questions?
No, I didn't see any questions, so we can close it. And thank you, Chris, again. Thank you all. And now it's time for the last closing session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity to share with everyone.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. We appreciate that. And okay, see you next session. And bye-bye, everybody.